Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles Stories of the Supernatural. And I hope you enjoy this new show, whether you're viewing it on the internet or listening to a podcast version of the episode. I do want to thank you for being part of my audience. You can also find links to videos or podcasts on miamighostchronicles.com, as well as where you can submit your story about any eerie experiences you've had, which I would love to hear about. Just go to the Submit Your Story tab. Please subscribe to our channel so that you receive notification of when we release a new show. And find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. This is where I usually live stream and where I give you a behind the scenes look at locations where new episodes are being filmed at. I also tell you about all the interesting guests that will be appearing soon on Stories of the Supernatural. I hope you enjoy the show, and I think you are all wonderful. Hi guys, it's Marlene from Miami Ghost Chronicles, and no, the audio is not off track. It's just that for some reason on this fantastic interview that I did with Patrick Orozco, my audio did not come out. Luckily, I did. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to fill in with what I know I said. But anyway, here on this introduction, okay, I do talk about the guest that I have, which his name is Patrick Henry Orozco, and he is an author. He is made films, and he's a solo ghost hunter. And he had his first ghost experience when he was just 5 years old. Okay, plus he's into exploring. And he says back in the 2000s, with the advent of the ghost hunting TV shows, is when he really got into going to some of these places to do investigations. He's been writing, including movie scripts. And this is at the time that he decided to get into not only going on these investigations, but going by himself. He is a graduate in 2006 from the University of Texas in San Antonio, and he does live and work in San Antonio. Back earlier this year, February of 2018, he released his book Timeline Solo Overnight Explorations of Some of America's Most Haunted Locations. And as you will see, he is not only going to talk about his prior experiences, but he just came back from a trip throughout the Midwest where he went to several haunted locations. Well, you'll hear about that, and like I said, you'll hear me dubbing things along as we go. So, guys, enjoy. This is a fantastic interview with Patrick. So, Patrick, what was that first experience that you had with the paranormal that you mentioned occurred when you were only 5 years old? If you could tell us about that.
It happened the day my grandfather died, which was on Father's Day in 1968. And me and my cousin George, we used to hang out a lot. We all lived on the same block. My grandparents lived to the left of us, and then my cousins lived to the right. And at some point early in the morning, we started to hear a lot of commotion coming from my grandmother's house, a lot of crying, screaming, that kind of stuff. That's because my grandmother had just been informed. And we were on our way over to see, well, what's going on. We didn't know. We just knew that there was something happening. And my sister caught up to us and said, no, come back here, come back to the house. She sat us down in the carport and said, don't move, just stay there until I get back, and I'll go see what's happening. And so we sat, just kind of wondering what's going on. And that's when we saw the gate to my house open on its own, swing open, and then swing back, close. Yeah, and of course, George took off running. And I thought he was going to run to the backyard, but no, he kept going. He jumped the fence. Yes. He left me there. He fell over the fence. He ran into his house. And I'm in the backyard by myself. And they kind of trying to figure out what is going on. And yeah, I mean, it was frightening because I thought that doesn't happen. And we knew, that's not supposed to happen. Gates don't open on their own and close on their own. So that was my first experience with the paranormal.
so funny. I think that that is so funny because, as I say, people that I've interviewed when they're a child and they have those experiences, they do one of two things. Either they engage in it like you did, or they do like your cousin. They bolt out of
Mm.
there and they never,
Yeah.
ever, ever want to have anything whatsoever to do with the paranormal again. And so tell me what happened after this experience. Like you said, that you were aware that this is, even at that age, that this was not normal. What happened after that? Did you have any other experiences with the paranormal?
I did have another significant experience. My grandmother eventually got uh, fell and broke her hip, and she moved in with us in our house, and my mom took care of her. And so my oldest brother moved into my grandmother's house, and he had this really amazing stereo. This was what, in the 70s, yeah, mid 70s, maybe no, late 70s. And I was over there at what used to be my grandmother's house, listening to the stereo, just playing records as loud as I could play them. And this was, an hour and a half, 2 hours. I'd call friends, talk on the phone. And at the end of the evening, all my brother wanted me to make sure that all the doors were locked. And I turned off all the lights. So I was going through that routine, turning everything off. The house was pitch black. I was about to leave the front door when I hear this very loud, audible sigh. I mean, practically in my face. And that really, really freaked me out. 'Cause, I mean, I was a kid, I was like 16, 17, something like that. And I ran to the street. I locked the door, ran to the street, and went back home immediately. And as I walked into my house, obviously they could see it on my face. They could see I was probably white as a sheet. And they said, "What the hell happened? What's wrong with you?" And I told them what happened. And everybody kind of just took it in stride, like, "Oh, it's probably your grandfather. You're probably irritating him with that loud music." Yeah,
Speaks volumes, Patrick, because mostly when you're a teenager, you are
yeah,
not paying attention
yeah.
to
That got my
any of
attention.
this stuff. Uh, for example, I've told this story before. When I was a teenager, and I was like 16 years old, and I had a boyfriend, and he was a busboy, so he would get home like around midnight. He would work on the weekends,
Yeah.
and this was once upon a time when there was just landlines, and I would take that cord and pull it as far as it would go, and I would sit in the hallway, um,
Mhm.
where I lived, and my mom would be asleep in her room, and I would be there talking to him, and of course, this is like around 1 a.m., and it was really quiet outside. And a couple of times I would hear like the chain link fence, like, when the gate, when you
Uh-huh.
jiggle it. And the first few times, of course, I'm thinking that's a cat. That's a cat making that noise or getting on it. But after a while, you realize,
Mhm. Yeah.
um, even though you're really distracted,
Yeah.
that is, it would have to be a really heavy cat. And we did have cats, by the way. But and then a couple of times, I ended up actually hearing some. And by the way, there was no trees out here on the yard. We only had one
Yeah.
big pine tree, and I actually heard somebody walking around in our yard. And to the point, I wasn't thinking anything
Yeah.
paranormal. I immediately went running and I jumped in my mom's bed, telling her, screaming, "Hey, there's somebody outside. There's somebody in the yard." So of course she wakes up. She's all groggy, but she turns off all the lights, and we're going from window to window, looking through the in the darkness in the yard. And of course, there's nobody out there. By the way, this is a residential neighborhood. Again, around 1 a.m., it's absolutely super quiet. We never heard
Yeah.
any steps of anybody running away or anything like that. And to be honest with you, I had grown up on this block and I had lived across the street. And this house originally had been owned by a couple that had a daughter, raised her, and she moved away.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
eventually, the old man, he died, and the widow, that's when she decided to rent out the house. I have a feeling that this was who was that we would occasionally hear, or I would occasionally hear, because my poor mom, she was the poor recipient of every time that I would
Yeah.
be listening to these things going on. And I mean, I had other experiences later on, which looking back at them now,
Oh
I
wow.
realized that they were paranormal, that there was something going on. But yeah,
Wow.
as far as that's how you realize when you're a teenager that something intrudes on you, that there is just no escaping it at all of what it is that you are experiencing. And so then what happened with you, Patrick?
Yeah.
Where did you go after that
Yeah.
as far as the interest in the paranormal?
It didn't resurface for me until the advent of the now popular ghost hunting shows on television, and that's at a time when I'd gone back to college to get my degree. And Wednesday, I remember it was always Wednesday night, and I had no idea that there were even those types of shows. I knew about paranormal groups, but I had no idea it was on television. So I got really interested in it. It was fun to watch, and I started to all those experiences that I had before, the interest started to get peaked again for me. And I wonder if I could do that alone. I wonder if I could go to those places.
You know that you were very brave to do that because not everybody does this solo.
Or very dumb.
So here you are, Patrick. You've decided that you're going to get into paranormal, investigation. So what did you do?
Yeah.
Where did you decide to go to first? Uh, did you try to do it solo? How did that work out for you? Because um, how was that first experience? Because now you're an adult, and you know, one thing is what you see on the TV, and then another thing is realities.
Yeah. Yeah.
What happened when you, or how did you decide to, or where to go where you had that first experience? But um, by the way, I still want to know how it was
Yeah.
that you decided to go solo because, like I said before, there's a lot of people out there that will absolutely do the ghost hunting part, except the I'm by myself thing.
No, I really wanted to. And the first place I went to, it was more like a test. And I was going to be part of a bigger group, and that's Waverly Hills Sanatorium in Kentucky, in Louisville. And that's kind of where I tested it out because even though I was in a group, it was only a group of about 11 or 12 people, and they had all kind of come together. So if they went off in one direction in the hospital, I'd take off as fast as I could in the opposite direction, just to go, just go poke around in video and see how it felt to be solo in a place like that. And I mean, it felt great. I felt very at ease, relaxed. And I thought, yeah, I think I can do this. I think I can go to these places solo. And and what really cemented it for me was when I did have to be with the group. They were very loud and talkative, and they were just snapping, flashing pictures and flashlights. And I just thought, yeah, groups are not for me.
You know what? I perfectly understand because I have had that group experience where sometimes you
Yeah,
do need the body count if you're doing an extensive investigation, but at the
yes,
same time, it can be very distracting. And I have
yes,
done both. I've gone to locations by myself, and yeah, you might not be able to have as much equipment, but you are able to pick up a lot more.
yeah,
And
yeah.
basically,
It is.
using, I think, one of the best equipment we have, which is our bodies. Uh, if you know how to tune in
Yeah.
and you are aware of what's going on, and then what happened?
I had great experiences. One of the most memorable experiences there was with the shadow people, and that's what that place is known for. It's known for its shadow activity, and which I did find. And I had a really interesting experience on the fourth floor, right outside of the surgical units, where I had an experience with a very large black entity, I guess I can call it, because I was looking down the hallway and I'd started to see some shadow activity. And it's very, very fast. Sometimes you almost question it. You're almost not sure if you actually saw what you saw. But this one was unmistakable because I was looking down the hallway and it was a full moon. There was moonlight coming in on both sides of the hallway through the open doorways. And suddenly the hallway started to get a lot darker, and it was approaching me. It was getting closer and closer to me. Every time it got closer, it would block out the light from coming into the windows, the moonlight, yeah. And it got up to about 10 feet from me, and then it stopped. And I thought, what is this? So I walked toward it, and it backs away from me really fast. And I thought, okay, the most logical thing I thought, well, there must be clouds, and the clouds must have blocked out the moonlight. So I went out to the balcony, and Waverly Hills is known for their balconies because that's where they would put their patients. You know, they roll them out into the fresh air. And I look up in the sky, and there's not a single cloud in the sky.
Well, there goes that theory of the moonlight.
Yeah, so I thought, okay, well, I went back and I sat down again at the end of the hallway, and it starts to happen again in the exact same way. It's this darkness that keeps getting closer and closer to me. I stand up, it stops, I walk toward it, and it backs away from me again really fast. I'm thinking, what? It's reacting to me. Yeah, exactly. I did feel that there was some sentience there. There was some intelligence, and it's interesting that it did back away from me. So I thought, okay, let's see if I can make this happen one more time. But unfortunately, that's when I started to see flashes and flashlights coming my way, and the group was finally catching up to me, and I had to abandon my sweet spot there.
So
Sadly.
Patrick, here you are. You did that test, which
Yeah.
is so interesting. So you realized I can be out here by myself, and I'm not going to panic, and bolt out the front door. As a matter of fact, it sounds like you were really comfortable, and I totally understand what you were
Yeah.
saying as far
Yeah.
as that it can be distracting,
Yeah.
especially if you're in a group that's not really
It was. Yeah.
professional or quiet, or they just don't understand.
And
So I
yeah.
think this was a great experience. As far as testing,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
what
It's a great place. It's an awesome,
what
awesome
you
place.
wanted to do when you were doing
Um,
investigations.
yeah.
You
Hmm.
passed that litmus test, which, by the way, a lot of people don't bother to do. So, and I know that this place is intense.
That was it. When I saw them coming up the hallway there with their flashlights, and I saw flash pictures, and I thought, oh, you just ruined this for me. That's when I realized, yeah, I'm gonna have to do this alone, solo. Uh, so yeah, I came back home and started researching, looking at locations that were affordable and accessible to me. And the following year, I went to 5 additional locations, 4 on the East Coast and 1 here in Texas.
So, Patrick, on these places that you went to, what type of experiences did you have? Because, like I say, a supernatural is not an on-demand thing, and sometimes things do happen. You're there at the right time, and then other times you go and nothing happens, or it's very low key.
Everywhere I went, I had something happen, something significant happen. The least activity was on the battleship USS North Carolina. It turned out to be fairly quiet. I had only one brief little shadow experience, but it was out of the corner of my eye. Like I barely caught it, so I kind of had to throw that one out because I didn't see it, you know, in front of me. Yeah. But yeah, every place had something significant happened. One of the noisiest places, it's a toss up between Fort Mifflin and West Virginia State Penitentiary. Fort Mifflin in the Commandant's.
Are you talking about Moundsville Prison?
It is Moundsville, yes. Yeah, yeah,
Yes, I
yeah.
had
That's
a
an awesome
chance
place.
to also go to Moundsville a couple of years ago, and you realize you don't quite capture the atmosphere when you see it on the TV. It's not until you go there that you realize how, first of all, how small the cells were, what kind of life it was. From what I understand, they had minimal staff there, and
Mm,
I believe there was
yeah,
also that area
yeah.
downstairs. I believe it was called the Sugar Shack, which is the guards wouldn't even go down there. So a lot of tragic and horrible things happened. And I
Yes, he was.
believe
Yeah,
also that at one point, a Manson was from that area.
yeah, Yeah.
and he put in a request that he wanted to be transferred over to Moundsville in order to be close to his family. And of course,
Yeah.
from what I understand, they turned him down because no warden wanted to put up with the problems that came, like housing somebody like Manson.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they also have on display the
Uh-huh.
Sparky,
Old
the
Sparky, I think.
electric chair, I think it was. Yeah,
Yeah.
even though it's behind a
Yeah,
case,
and
that really put out some vibes.
yeah, the funny thing about the Manson story, and I don't know if this is true or not, the gal who gave me the tour that night was was like a cousin or kind of related to Manson himself, and I thought, wow, yeah, but yeah, because he is from that area, yeah,
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize the notoriety and the headaches that come that if you have an inmate like Charlie
yeah,
Manson,
yeah,
what that means. And if they were already short on personnel, having to put in the extra manpower to look over Charlie Manson. But he seems to have done well because the prison system took
mm-hmm,
pretty decent
yeah,
care of him. I mean,
yeah.
I believe he passed away not too long ago, and he was a pretty old guy. And it makes you wonder, Patrick, where is he now, huh?
A few months ago, so yeah, he might be there now.
You're right. He could be there. I
Yeah,
mean, think about it. This is close to home, even though for somebody usually had spent as much time in prison as he did, uh,
yeah,
prison is home, but it's like, well, maybe this is the prison closest to home. But yeah, there was a lot of dark things that went on there. That prison, it had its, you know, when I
yeah,
went, it was a very small group, and I was just with my husband. It was like a kind of an impromptu stop by. But yeah, there's a lot of eerie things going on there. I mean, there's that hallway where I can't remember the lady's
yes,
name that took the picture of what was thought to be a shadow guy all the way at the end of that hallway. And not till you're there till you really see
yeah,
how small those cells were. And some of them were piled in there, three to a cell. And I mean, life must have been hell like that, considering that a
right,
lot of
yeah,
the guys that were there were criminals, obviously, but yeah, a lot of horrific things must have happened there. So I'm not surprised that there's a lot
okay.
of intelligent and malevolent experiences or hauntings going on there.
Oh,
Yeah, including that area they used to call the Sugar Shack, which was no man's land. Nobody would go there.
the Sugar Shack. Yes, that's Moundsville. Yeah.
So Patrick, the feeling I got, even though I didn't take, any type of recording equipment with me at that time, was that obviously besides the things that are known, I'm sure there's horrific things that happen there that are unknown, and like a lot of these prisons, that there's intelligent and
Yeah.
maleficent entities there, besides the residual stuff. And I'm curious, especially a guy by himself, what happened when you were there? Um, what
Yeah.
experiences that you had? I'm very curious to see what you experienced.
Well, that's a funny thing is that this was the one place I thought I would feel that negative energy, that I would feel the most amount of dread, and it was the opposite for me. I was super relaxed. It was really fun to be there. It's such a fascinating place. I'd never been inside a prison uh, like that, and I never knew what it was like. What was it like to be inside? And that's another one of the things that really interests me about doing this is that you get to go into these places that most people probably wouldn't want to go, especially alone at night. So yeah, the only place that's I felt a little bit of dread was in the hole, uh, and and that, and I also had a lot of bats in there with me, so it was. At one point, there were so many bats. I just finally had to just abandon the place because yeah, there were just tons of bats in there. So, in fact, yeah, yeah, yeah. When one of them finally hit my camera, I said, "No, you gotta go."
Yes, I think that's the point where I say, "Yep, this is over. Bats, thanks, but no thanks." Absolutely not. So I know where you were coming from. And that's another thing. Uh, people were they. I think me and one other person of the whole group
Yeah,
was actually able to go into the cells happily and just sit down to have that
yeah,
experience. Because the majority of people,
yeah.
all they do is they're like, "Yeah, I'll look at you do it, but absolutely not. I am not about to go inside that cell and experience what it was like." So, yeah, I know what you mean.
I spent a lot of time in the cells. Yeah, just and yeah.
And
Oh
that's what I
yeah,
mean, which is,
yeah,
I know that people definitely, if they're afraid even to step inside a cell and have that experience, and there's a group of people around, that's why I'm so sure that very few people do
hmm,
what you do, which is the solo ghost hunting.
yes,
Because
yes,
believe me, the last thing a lot of people, it's almost like
hmm,
if something's gonna happen to me, I want it. I want to have company.
yeah.
I want either we're all going down or somebody's gonna need to save me and get me out of here. How about other experiences? Have you really had this experience where you encountered something malevolent and unexpected?
Yes, that was. In fact, that was just last year, and it was close by. I was at Yocum, the old Yocum Community Hospital in Yocum, Texas, and I had actually been in there a month before with a group. I had been invited to go with a group to spend some time with them, and but then they let me go in alone, and that's where I started doing some sensory deprivation kind of stuff, experiments. But on my return visit, when I had the place to myself, when I soloed it a month later, which was almost exactly a year ago, it had been pretty quiet, and I was upstairs on the second floor, and all of a sudden I started to hear very loud crashing, banging sounds coming from the ICU area, and the ICU area is completely sealed off. So I knew immediately, okay, that's either somebody else, somebody got in here, and they're in there with me, or it's paranormal. So I go into ICU, and it was the sounds were so loud that they peaked my audio levels on all my devices. They were so loud that I felt them. They were percussive. And I go into ICU, and there's nobody in there. There's nothing broken. It sounded like a big plate glass, a window had been thrown on the ground. Nothing. I didn't find anything in there. So while I'm poking around in there trying to figure out, well, trying to debunk it, trying to figure out, is there any way this could have happened? Outside in the hallway, right where my static camera is, the sounds start again, and it sounds like somebody taking a big 2x4 and just smashing the walls as hard as they could. And so I come out to the hallway again. I'm asking, who's here? Who's doing this? There's no other sounds. I don't hear any other person running away or laughing or giggling because when humans do that, they're going to give themselves away. And here I didn't hear anything. I only heard these crashing sounds. And that's the first time I had a real fear response because because it's automatic. Your brain's telling you this is weird. This isn't supposed to happen. You need to be really careful. Which I was because I am alone. This thing sounded like it was angry and like it had a lot of energy. Um, about another couple of minutes, it's way, way down the hall, and it's doing it again. It's like really just throwing things around, crashing things, and then immediately after that, it just went dead silent, like it left. And at the end of the hallway, there was a broken out window that went right outside. And that's the feeling I got. The feeling I got was that it was having a tantrum. It got really upset that I was up there, and it was forced to leave the building. And the one thing you never see you can't see or you can't feel on television is you see maybe something that happens and you might hear something that happens, but there's also a feeling to this that I think most people don't realize. And to me, the only way I can describe it is it's kind of like a static energy, a very mild, like there's this energy, and when those last sounds happened, that stopped. and like I said, it went just dead quiet, and like it was gone. Yeah,
So, Patrick, one of the things that
yeah, yeah.
happens when you're alone is that you don't have as many people to carry things. So, how much equipment, what do you have with you on these explorations?
I have usually 4 cameras, 2 video cameras, and 2 GoPros. All of them are, and I'm shooting everything in infrared. I'll have 2 or 3 audio recorders, and that's pretty much it.
Yes, sometimes too many gadgets
Yeah, I'm a
distract.
very anti-gadget. Um, per, yeah,
And personally, I think that one of the best gadgets is our body. Um, I think that
yeah, yeah,
sometimes,
yeah,
especially if you're tuned to it and you recognize it, you know when you're feeling certain things in your body that you might have something supernatural coming near or
yeah,
about to take place. And after a while, when you've been doing this work, you kind of know how to tell uh,
yes,
when something like that happens. And
exactly.
equipment is great because it allows you to capture a lot of information.
Yeah,
But I come
yeah,
from the time in the 90s when this was even pre digital photography. So, in other words, it would cost you money to develop photographs. So, you had to rely on more basic stuff.
right.
And this is where you
Yes,
tuned into what you were feeling. And as far as photography or
yeah,
EVPs, especially, people don't realize that a lot of times it is much, much easier for to capture an EVP as far as energy wise from an entity.
and and I always wondered why on television they were getting so little, and why I had so much. It, I'm still like trying to figure that one out.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because in truth, energy wise for an entity, it requires a lot less to manifest on audio.
yeah,
And I know sometimes you hear certain EVPs that, God, it could be anything. It's really difficult to discern if in truth
right.
what it is
Yes,
something from the other
yeah,
side. Other
yeah,
times it's very clear that you're actually catching
mm,
an entire a phrase or words that are intelligent and otherwise, especially if you've been asking
right.
questions along the way, or if, for example,
Yeah,
what you're getting is a name, which is also very interesting, and that in some
yeah,
cases, not all the time, you know, it allows you to even go back and possibly validate, depending on where you're at, either from newspapers or if it's a location,
yes,
let's say where they patient records. But sometimes, if you're lucky, that's very slim,
yeah, yeah.
but it does show some type
Oh yeah,
of
yeah. All the time.
intelligence when you get those
Yeah,
kind of EVPs, which are much more common. And another thing that people don't realize also is that when you go out there, it's very time consuming to go through all this
yeah,
evidence, whether it's just audio or video, because it's just not watching it. It's that you have to look very, very closely to see if you capture something that might be off in a quarter or a shadow. What's your experience with this, Patrick?
I almost never listen to anything on site, um, because I again it's kind of distraction. It kind of throws me off. I prefer to just kind of come home and slowly take my time analyzing audio and video. Uh, but yeah, there was only one place I went to that I didn't get a single thing, and that was here in Texas in Goliad at the old fort in Presidio de la Bahia. I didn't get anything. I mean, nothing. Yeah, like they were on vacation or something that night.
Yep, that's one of my favorite
Yeah,
sayings, Patrick, that the supernatural is not an on-demand
yeah,
thing. That
yeah,
doesn't mean sometimes that there's nothing there. Sometimes there is nothing there, and other times the timing is just not
yeah.
right for whatever reason.
Right.
Sometimes I've heard
Yeah,
of certain hauntings that are tied into certain anniversaries or even seasonal, or under certain weather conditions.
yeah,
And if your timing is not what it should be, you just are not able to capture stuff. Other
Yeah.
times, if you have somebody that's sensitive, sometimes that you see an uptick in interaction, as in just more activity witnessed.
Yeah.
And also, Patrick, what about bringing anybody home with you? Have you had any experiences along those lines?
Yes. And I suspect it was from Waverly because I first edited that video in 2012, and I made a short little movie that I just passed around to my family and friends. And a little bit later, when I did the five additional locations, I decided to put it in a series. And I needed to re-edit it. And I was already living in the place I live now. And when I started working on that video, when I opened those files the very first time, it's when sounds I had never heard before, loud clicking sounds, rustling sounds, knocking sounds, all coming from the closet near the bathroom. I would hear the shower curtain rustling. And I thought, what the, there were sounds that I've never heard before and I've never heard since. Once I finished re-editing the Waverly Hills video, it stopped completely. Yeah, yeah, really weird. And then here's a story I've never told anyone. This was in 2012. I was living with my sister out of necessity. There was a big complicated thing with my old apartment, and I had to vacate. So I lived with my sister, and that's when I went to Waverly Hills. And in about a couple of weeks after I came back from Waverly Hills, she was a school teacher. This was my day off. On my day off, I would go run errands, and I'd come back. And I came back to the house about 3 o'clock, and I was walking upstairs to my room, and I heard the sound of like either one little girl or two little girls laughing in my room. And I thought, what the? Yeah, exactly. I said, why are there kids in my room? And I thought, well, maybe my sister had to bring kids, school kids with her for some reason. She's tutoring them or something. And I thought, but why are they in my room? So I actually go up to my door and I actually knock on the door and say, hello, I'm coming in. And of course, there's nobody in there. So I go to the only window. Yeah, I go to the only window in the room, and I thought, this guy had to come from outside. But I look, and I can see all the 4 yards that surround her house, and there's not a single person out there. So, yeah.
And see, this is what I mean. Here you are. You're not looking for the paranormal moment. You're coming
Yeah.
home and you even think that these are real kids. And of course,
Yeah.
the only question you have is, why are these kids in my room of all
Yeah.
places? And then you have that shock moment, that oh
Exactly.
crap moment.
It was, yeah. It's a tiny little bedroom, so yeah, it's like, wow. Yeah.
And you know what also makes me laugh about this, Patrick, is that, sometimes, and I'm the first one, you always think of
Yeah.
to have that experience, whether it's visual or audio, that you like what happened with you. You have to go to some spooky place, or some place has got a reputation for being haunted, or people have had experiences. And sometimes
Yeah.
it comes to you. It comes to you. You don't have to look for it. And that's another thing I've pointed out,
Exactly.
that when you do this work
Yeah.
for a while, every once in a while this stuff does happen. Usually it'll go away. But yes, when you least expect it, when you're not, of
Mm-hmm.
course, have any
Yeah.
equipment ready, you have it and it kind of slaps you in the face. And like, like I said, your first instinct is not
Yeah.
to think that what you're experiencing is in any way paranormal. You always go to the logical, what could it be, as in a live person. And then
Yeah.
you have that, oh, okay, that was not a live person. And then, and that's what I also call the paradigm shift for
Yeah.
paranormal investigators, where, yeah, you weren't out on an investigation, you didn't have equipment, you weren't looking for it. And like you said, you have gone through a checklist of what it could possibly rationally be. and
Right.
nothing
Yeah.
applies. So you're left with only one conclusion, that it was paranormal. And even if nobody was there to witness this, you understand what happened. So, Patrick, what happened when you just that trip that you just finished to the Midwest? What was that about?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I was looking for a different place of the country to go do this, and Midwest. Like, who would have thought the Midwest was so haunted? But I mean, yeah, I guess every place is just as haunted. So yeah, I went to Melbourne Manor in Melbourne, Iowa. Yeah,
That's incredible. I just
yeah.
interviewed Josh Hurd last week.
Oh yeah, Josh. Yeah,
Yes, Josh, as the co-owner of that place, he really had some incredible stories to tell. Things
yeah.
that he has experienced just based on the history of that place. It is incredible.
Pretty creepy place, as you might imagine. And well, I mean, as all asylums probably are. Um, but for me, it was pretty quiet, except when I was in the most famous room there, which had Gracie. And Gracie was a mental health patient. She had schizophrenia, uh, personality disorders, and I kind of spent a good amount of time in her room with her. I lay down on her bed. I sat in a chair, and that's when I heard like a whimper. And this was more. This wasn't like later. I heard it on audio or anything. I heard it there in the room. This was a disembodied a sound, a voice. And a little bit later, outside of her room, I did hear again another disembodied voice. It was female, but I did not understand what she said. And then there in the parlor area with the wheelchair, there's a wheelchair there that's supposed to, that sometimes Josh comes the next day and he finds it's been moved somehow during the night. So I thought that'd be a great place to do some sensory deprivation experiments. So that's where, yeah. So I sat on the wheelchair and I strapped my legs down with uh, tie downs, uh, and then I blindfold myself, and then I strap down my arm to the wheelchair. So that way there's no way I can escape. And maybe, maybe by making myself that vulnerable, something will want to come and, push the wheelchair. And I kept saying, come on, push the wheelchair. Push me around, push me around. And the only thing that happened, and I was wearing shorts, is that I felt something kind of like tickling my right knee. And it persisted. Yeah. And then I thought, okay, well, I guess you got something for knees. And I said, well, can you do more than that? Can you do more than that? And that's when my knee got super, super cold. And it was just my right knee right there. It just got really cold. But that's, unfortunately, I didn't get pushed on the wheelchair, which is what I really wanted to happen.
I
Um,
mean, Melbourne Manor, it has quite a history, but especially during when it was still like a home for people with disabilities,
yeah,
the thing is, and I discussed it with Josh, where a lot of people
yeah,
considered this place home. This is where they lived for like many, many, many
yeah,
years. So, of course, things happen there.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And a lot of people, yeah, a lot of people. Also, when it was a hotel, it was originally a hotel, and a lot, sometimes die. Um, yeah,
Yes, that place has been around long enough that a lot of things have
yeah,
happened there.
yeah. But it's a great place. It's an awesome, awesome place.
And yeah, that was the thing. As its incarnation as a hotel, it was like the one hotel in this small town. So, yes, you had your
Yeah,
regular traveler that was just staying there, but a lot of things take place in hotels. It's, that like that saying, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Well, that mentality sometimes was
yeah.
what was going on even back in the supposedly good old days where uh, just
Right.
strange and unusual and bizarre and sometimes tragic things would happen at hotels. So where
Yes.
else did you go to, Patrick, on this trip?
Another place I went to, which was a bucket list location for me, because it was one of the first things I ever saw on television that piqued my interest again, which was the Sallie House in Kansas, in Atchison, Kansas. Creepy, creepy old house built in the mid 1800s by the Finney brothers. The story that is attached to the house may or may not be true. It hasn't been substantiated, and that's of the little girl named Sally who died from during a botched appendix operation. But again, there's no paperwork. There's no history that actually really happened there. However, lots of people did die in the house. A couple of the Finney family members died there. Some other people died. Yeah. The most significant thing that happened there was in one of the bedrooms upstairs, where I was sitting in a chair in a bedroom, and there's furniture up there. There's beds and chairs, and I had one leg cross over the other, and I saw this little black shadow very close to the ground go around me. And just a few seconds later, I feel a tug on my shoelaces, on that foot. Yeah. And I again, every time that happens, I say, "Can you do that again? Can you do that again?" And look, and unfortunately, I couldn't get it to happen again. And I didn't have the camera on my shoe, but nothing happened. And I
When you say small, was this like a child or something very
something
low to
very
the
close to the
ground?
ground, something really small. Yeah, which is more common than anybody might think. There's a lot of those. I actually do have one on video even that I just for when I went to Yocum, and it was the same thing. This little shadow very close to the ground, just kind of floating by. It went around me and behind me, and that's it.
And Patrick, the thing about these locations is that yes, you have your regular spirits, and not only because everybody thinks of
Yeah,
non-human as the D word demons, but sometimes you do have
yeah,
non-human entities, which accounts for a lot of these weird shadows, like either the really small ones that you saw or the really
yeah,
tall ones that are just entities quite different. And it depends. Sometimes they congregate where there's been human tragedy or agony. Other times they've been invoked for some reason. I'm not really
yeah.
sure what their source is or where they come from. Uh, but yes, sometimes things like this do occur.
They have, yeah, yeah. And of course, it was a doctor's office, so if anybody came in with fatal injuries, maybe some of them died there. But again, it's very difficult to get records. It's very difficult to get anything, on paper about the place. It's just some of those things. Some of the deaths have been recorded, and it was mostly the Finney family that died there. Yeah, and
And it's really interesting what you said that at one time it was a doctor's office because you know what? Yes, people did die of a lot of
hmm
diseases that now we have cures for, or vaccines,
yeah,
or inoculations, or but back then you
yeah,
could very easily die from the simplest thing.
yeah.
You could get a cut, and it would go septic. Um, like that
Oh
story
yeah,
about the little girl that she died from an appendicitis attack that was unattended or that was misdiagnosed. Same thing. We're so used to calling 911 and you get
yeah,
transported and you have a 12 person team ready to handle even traumatic injuries that
yeah,
we don't realize that back in those years
yeah.
you were lucky if you had one doctor in the town, and sometimes
Right.
either he didn't have the skill or he just didn't have the
Yeah.
equipment to save people with traumatic injuries, or sometimes it could just be the simplest thing, uh, depending was even if they had the ability to
Yeah.
x-ray, uh, you could be misdiagnosed or just simply die from something very, very simple.
Right. I mean, and back then people were dying from gastritis. I mean, ugh. Yeah.
And the reason that I bring that up is as far as it comes to hauntings is that yes, people were more accepting because that
Yeah.
death could happen. Child mortality was higher, and From what I understand, even life expectancy was shorter, but still, there were moments
Quicken.
when
Yeah.
people were
Yeah.
just not expecting to die quite so suddenly, or in some cases where, let's say, in the case of the Sallie House, where they actually died there, and maybe they went there um,
Yeah.
to meet with a doctor, hoping that they were going to be saved, or let's say you took your child, maybe thinking it was something simple, and it turned out to not be, or you took the child but when it was too late, or you yourself went, or somebody went when it
Yes.
was just too late, and inevitably, that people ended up passing away there in that house. So that, yes, that could contribute to the hauntings. And
Yeah. Yeah.
so
I
what
agree.
happens
Yeah.
when, as far as planning the next location?
It was fun. Yeah. I really enjoyed it. It was time. It was time for me to be alone in the dark again. I was going a little stir crazy at my job. I had to get out of here.
Yes, I totally understand where you're coming from. And you know what? This is also how you realize that what you're doing is a passion. When, you're ready planning where you want to go to, in the smallest detail, and absolutely,
Yeah.
like you said, you develop this expectations of, like, I want to
Yes.
go to this place, I want to capture, but at the same time, I want to be
Yeah.
totally, I don't want it to be subjective. I want it to be a professional investigation. As much as I would like to capture evidence, you always go there with a mindset of
Yeah.
it's got to be authentic. Otherwise, it's not worth it. So, Patrick,
Yeah.
I know that you went to some other places, like you just stated before, that you didn't realize that the Midwest was actually as haunted as it was. What was the next stop for you?
Um, I'm going to say the last place I went to in the Midwest on my Midwest jaunt was the Villisca Axe Murder House, and this one turned out to be, it, yeah, this one was the first time that something messed with my head, that really messed with my head. Yeah. It was in the kids' room, and this is a horrible, horrible, sad story of this horrible man that went into this family's home and murdered everyone with an axe and hit everybody exactly on the upper top half of the head. Like there weren't any axe hits below the jawline. Just a horrible, horrible, tragic story where children were axed to death. But in the kids' room, I was sitting on the floor and I was just kind of just getting a feel for the room and asking, who's here? What's your name? I started to have these really intense visions of this man coming up the stairs with an axe. And I couldn't shake it. I couldn't shake it. Like I tried to concentrate on where I was and what I was doing and asking questions, but that imagery kept like really getting into my head. And I had been warned about it. I had been warned that's what happens in that house. Is that that there's either entities there or entities that and here's my thinking about this place. I don't think it's any of the kids. I don't think it's any of the family, because why on earth would you want to go back to that scene? Why would you want to go back to the place where you were brutally, horribly murdered? Yeah, so I think it's something else. I think there's something else there that maybe someone else brought from another location. Maybe I brought it from another location. I don't know.
And you know what? You're absolutely right. I want to say that sometimes, 98% of your visitors to some of these locations, they're just there to have the experience, whatever it's going to be for them. And then, sometimes you say, sometimes people do bring things with them, especially like if they've just come from another location. But I've found in
Yeah,
sometimes you do get
yeah,
people that go to these locations just because, believe it or not, they identify more with the killer or with whatever
yeah,
grisly
yeah.
murder took place there. Almost what they want to is experience or encourage that
Hmm.
darkness that occurred there. Uh, and sometimes I think that when you get people like that go to these locations, of course, under the guise of just being regular old people or investigators just going there to visit a haunted house, they're really either when somebody's not watching
Right.
them or mentally they're
Yeah.
invoking or encouraging or even trying to open up doorways of that darkness that they're trying to encourage.
Yeah.
And I myself, when you go to these
Yeah.
places, obviously, especially when it has a history like the Villisca Axe House that is very dark, people don't realize that, or sometimes even if it was abandoned or shut down for a while, for some reason, places like this become a magnet for people to go in there and do ceremonies and rituals. And yeah,
Yes.
then maybe later on they patch everything up and it's repainted or everything is good and nobody is the wiser
Yeah. Yeah. That's right.
of what was invoked or what was brought into that space. Some things that are very dark,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Yes, it was.
like
Yeah.
what you described, that what they do is they play with your head. They look into your mind somehow or other. I'm not sure how this would happen, but they kind of play onto your fear because that's what they thrive off
Yeah.
of. They thrive
Yeah.
off of the fear that they can cause and actually what happened there before.
It's 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 tiny. It's a tiny little house. Yeah. Yeah. I don't understand how you could possibly want to bring in more than maybe one or two people because it's just so small. I can't imagine a big team in there.
Yeah, I believe that it is a very small house, and I've seen a couple of interviews of people that actually rented this location,
Yeah.
between after that time and, through the intervening years, and they claimed that there was some
Yes.
very unusual activity that occurred while they were there. And another thing that had to do with his murder, as horrible as it was, and these children and everything, which
Yeah.
absolutely speaks of somebody that was
You're gonna hear it.
bloodthirsty,
Yeah.
was that the
Yeah.
culprit was never
Yeah.
caught. I mean, I know they had several suspects and this and that, and this is another thing that, they look at it as, well, there was a disagreement with whether it was over business or, I mean, but if you take away whatever the reason was that somebody decided they were going to go in there, the fact that whoever did it was able to not only kill human beings but kill
Yeah.
all these children speaks volumes that you were talking about a very
Yeah.
deeply disturbed, dark, and malevolent person who could go and do that. And chances are that this was not
Yeah.
an isolated incident. I'm sure this person must have done it before and probably went on to do it again.
Yeah.
And one of the other things that I think is very interesting that you think yourself, like you described, this is such a small house that this is a phenomena that I've seen associated with some very dark places where no noise was ever heard. And I believe one of the things that they thought of was that
Mhm.
the perpetrator had already snuck into the house and was upstairs in the attic and waited for everybody to
Yeah.
go to sleep and then went down and killed them all. But no noise was ever heard. Nothing to alert the family, the creaking of wood, nothing like that. And the same thing happened with the Amityville murders, the DeFales. All these gunshots are heard in a quiet residential area. Nobody wakes
Yeah.
up. There was another. They call the Easter
Wow.
Sunday slayings. I don't. I think it was in the 70s or 80s,
And
early 80s. I don't
yeah.
remember
Huh.
exactly. Same thing. Guy. He becomes a family annihilator. He wipes out
Wow.
his brother's wife, his various children, and his mom. And what happened was he was living with his mother, and of course the whole family
Right.
had come to the house because it was Easter Sunday, and he decided he just went
Yeah.
downstairs to or upstairs to his room, comes back down, and kills
Yeah.
everybody with gunshot, shoots everybody. And this is in the middle of a day on a Sunday, in the middle of a residential area, and nobody hears the
Yeah.
gunshot blasts.
Hmm.
Because you could say, okay, maybe one shot, people put it off the firecracker. Nobody hears
Yeah.
multiple shots. And as a matter of fact, the only way that the police became aware of the murder
Yeah.
was after it had been completed, and later on, he was the one that called the police and talked about it. So yeah, that's so. What else happened?
I'm trying to get either the Lexington, which is close by, that's in Corpus Christi on the coast here, or some other USS battleship or carrier. I'm looking. I'm looking into trying to get something like that. I probably next year I'll return to the East Coast, go to maybe some locations that I haven't been to. Still kind of looking to see. This trip originally was going to be a New York trip because there's a couple of locations in Massachusetts and in New York, upper state New York, that I really wanted to get to, but unfortunately, this is just how it worked out. So,
So Patrick, I imagine you haven't had a chance to review any of your footage, right?
unfortunately, no. It was, yeah. I took a lot more video than I usually do. So I literally just stopped unloading or uploading video just 2 nights ago. So it took a long time. Yeah, yeah. But no, I haven't had a chance to look at anything.
So Patrick, what are you going to do now? Are you going to put together some type of documentary? How are you going to weave this
Yeah.
together? As far
Um,
as to, I guess, what, go through the highlights of the evidence you captured? What are you going to do? Because I'm sure you captured a lot of interesting stuff.
yeah. Well, I do actually. I did do a web series for the 6 locations that I went to in 2013, 20 to 2015. Yeah, and and I've got a website, www.timelineshow.com. That's 2 S's, Timelines Show, and all the videos are there. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so I guess what you're not going to do them per se a series like what you did previously. So what are you going to do with this material?
It is. I'm not going to do a series, no, but I'm going to I'm thinking about doing just a whole the whole documentary about all the locations, all in just one little short movie. Yeah.
Yes, and I totally understand that even before you get into production, you have to sit there and review it. And unlike some other places which have got boatloads of people to review
Oh yeah.
both audio and video,
Yeah.
when you are by yourself, it can be really time consuming to
Yes.
not only review it, but
Yeah.
then pull out what you want. About how long do you think it'll be?
Yeah. It's going to take me probably about a year to go through all this stuff. Yeah. It's a lot.
Patrick, I take it, what are you already planning your next trip, the next locations that you're going to go
Mm.
to? Because I know that for you,
Yes.
um,
Yeah. Yeah. Looking forward
this
to it.
is, I know there's a lot of planning that's involved with it. Where are you going to next?
It depends. The locations I went to this time, just a couple of weeks ago, were so close by that I based out of for 2 locations I based out of Omaha, and then for the last location I was in Kansas. So I'll fly. I'll fly to the nearest city, and then rent a car, and then yeah, yeah, yeah.
And, I also wanted to know, because especially on the car trips, have you ever had any hitchhikers, somebody that wants to come along and keep you company?
I yeah. I went to the USS North Carolina. I got this EVP of this male who, when I said, "Can you tell me your name?" and the response was Four Eyes, and I wear glasses. Yeah, I wear, I'm short-sighted. I'm nearsighted. So, and I'm pretty sure he was referring to me. I think he was making fun of me. And here's the funny thing: is that a couple of nights later, I'm at Fort Mifflin, and I'm asking the same thing. I'm in the commandant's quarters, and it's hard to hear it, but there's a voice again that says, "Hi, Four Eyes." So, and that there is this, Yeah, there's a story of this very mischievous spirit that's on that USS battleship, the North Carolina, that will get in your car if you don't, and try to spook you.
You know, that's one of the things, Patrick, that uh, I was always cautious about that because that's another thing. When you do this type of work,
Yeah,
there's
yeah,
something
yeah.
that's
Oh,
attractive about you when it comes to hitchhiker ghosts. And, not all of them are bound to
yeah,
locations. Some of them are free floating. And if you're either sensitive or, of course, trying to communicate with them, they take it as an open
yeah,
invitation and they want to hang out with you.
yeah.
Plus, a lot of them,
Oh, yeah,
they still have the personalities they had when they were alive, whether they were a prankster or just jerks or what, they just, or they're trying, like what this one was calling you four eyes. Yeah, they still retain those qualities, those personality qualities. So, do you think you're going to be taking
yeah.
anybody with you on your next trip?
Probably not.
And I'm just kidding because I know that you really enjoy this solo endeavor,
That's
which
right.
personally
Yeah, yeah,
I think is super admirable. Because in truth, I know because of so many years I've done this that there's very,
yeah.
very few paranormal investigators. I'm not even going into regular people. Very few investigators that will go out there and do what you do. And where can people go to find out more about you?
Yeah, it's www.timelineshow.com. That's timelines show, two S's. And yeah, there's pictures, there's videos, and you can find out how to get my book on Amazon.
Patrick, I want to thank you so very much for the time you spent here. You have been wonderful.
You too. Thank you, Marlene. I appreciate it. Bye bye.
So, what did you guys think? I always ask you the same thing. I thought it was a terrific interview. Plus, I am not kidding you. There's I think I could count on one hand the amount of people that will do what he does. Okay, I've gone into places by myself, but in truth, I always have a lookout. I mean, I've gone in groups, but I always have a lookout because it's just safer. And especially if you go into some of these places, not like a location where there's a manager or somebody. I'm talking about, sometimes you go on to like an urban exploration kind of location that gets reputation. And the reason why I say this is that sometimes you have to really be careful. Number one, because you can run into a live person that is there and is not supposed to be there. And sometimes the more remote the place is, the more attractive it is. Mostly because, for example, maybe the police don't even go out there. So going out there to one of these locations, you could run into more than one person that you really don't want to run into. Uh, or if you have an accident that happens, a lot of these locations, they're not safe. They've got rotted wood, rotted flooring. A million things can happen, and if you're by yourself, you might need somebody to call for help, or you need an emergency, somebody to get you out of there. So again, as far as when you're going to some of these places, absolutely, you have to take care of yourself. You want to interact with the dead, not become one of them before it's your time. And you know what? I've run across several stories of investigators and legend trippers going on to places uh, and ending up getting killed because they either took falls that were pretty high up, things happened and they just didn't expect it, they didn't do the research, and they ended up dead. And that's not really what you want. That's not really what this is about. The idea is to have a good time, but always to be safe. So, for any of you that are going out there, if you want to do the solo stuff, then you would have to do something along the same lines as what Patrick does, which is where he's going to locations where it's, for lack of a better word, it's a controlled location. All right. In an emergency, you've got somebody there that you can reach out to, and that's going to help you. Plus, they've already taken pains to more or less qualify the place as being safe. So some of those things that he talked about, let me tell you, I think that is so super interesting. His the aspect that he's coming at this from, because that thing about that sensory deprivation, that's another thing. Forget the being alone part. When you start talking about sensory deprivation, tying yourself down, a blindfold, uh, I'm telling you, most people is like, are you kidding me? Like, if something touches me and I need to go screaming, I want to be able to run screaming out immediately. So that's another thing. I'm telling you, I don't even think I would do that. I think that that's where, yeah, that's where I know I know my limitations, and that would be one of them. Uh, I, it's like I know there's people out there that they want to have that ultimate rush moment of with the supernatural, but you know what? I don't think I could even go that far. But anyway, guys, I really hope you enjoyed this show. Um, Absolutely, make sure to go on Patrick's website and check out his videos, his books, all the things that he's got. Maybe he does post things about the places that he's going to be going to. That would be super interesting. And also, if you're, catch me, don't forget, guys, my true believers, write to me at Marlene at MiamiGhostChronicles.com. I've been getting some fantastic stories. I'm hoping to get more. So don't forget about me. Like I said, any type of stories, even if they're secondhand, even if they didn't happen directly to you or you heard about it, I want to hear about it. Don't forget, you can also catch me on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. I live stream there. Plus, I also put on there a lot of the links to the shows, and you can go to MiamiGhostChronicles.com. I have links to the YouTube videos. I also have links to MP3 files if you want to download the podcast version of the show. Plus, there are also links to the podcast platforms where you can also download the show in case you have one of these that you absolutely love, such as iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, Mixcloud. You can find me on all of those, and all you have to do is go to MiamiGhostChronicles.com, and on that face page, you're going to find the link directly to those locations. So, guys, again, I want to thank you for joining me. I have a lot of fantastic guests coming on. I'm already working on season 5 of Stories of the Supernatural. And like I said, I've got some interesting, fantastic guests. I'm also going to be putting together every once in a while a show with different ghost stories, because a lot of people are asking me that they want to hear stories about some of these locations. So I am going to put together some shows where it's not necessarily an interview, but I'm going to put together what are the best ghost stories about certain locations, with a little bit of history. And some of them, some urban myths thrown in there into the mix, because like everything, a lot of these urban myths, sometimes you hear them and on the face of them, they sound really fantastical, but there's always a good chance that there is a kernel of truth in there. And I'm also going to dig up, that I love research, and a lot of these places, when you do the research, you uncover some very disturbing stories, much more disturbing actually than the urban myths about things that happen there. So I'm going to put some shows together along those lines. Some of the well known stories, news stories, ghost stories, urban myths, experiences that people have told me about, because that's another thing when you do this work. You get a lot of people that come up to you and tell you some really super interesting story about some locations that you just don't find in any of the text, any of the books that you read about, because it's just a moment that happens where somebody tells you a story, and a lot of the times the person telling you the story starts it off with, "I've never told this to anybody before," so you know that 9 times out of 10 you are going to hear something super interesting and believable, because the reason that people don't say anything to anybody is because they are afraid of getting laughed at, or being thought crazy, and they've walked around with this fantastic story about either one experience or several experiences, that when they come across somebody that does the paranormal and that they feel pretty sure is not going to laugh at them or tell them that they're crazy, then they sometimes have the most fabulous and super interesting stories. And that's what I'm hoping I am going to bring. So again, guys, thank you so much for being part of my audience and for sharing this time with me. Again, go to miamighostchronicles.com and you can see links to all the shows, all the new seasons, everything that's up and coming, or catch us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And don't forget, my true believers, to reach out to me with your story. Take care, guys.